Hello and welcome into the KE Report. Shad and Corey here as your host, and today we're getting an update from Erik Wetterling. Erik's known as the Hedgeless Horseman. You can follow him over at thehedgelesshorseman.com. We will put a link to that down below so you can follow along. Erik, talking to you as you've made it back from your trek to Toronto to go to the conference season over there. You made it to the PDAC convention, and you came back from it with, like everybody, your own unique take on things. I think it'd be helpful for people listening in just to find out, not necessarily any amazing takeaways, but if you have them, please share them, but just how you approach going to a conference, how you try to maximize it. Is it more about building a couple key relationships? Is it more about checking in with the companies? Is it talking to other investors? How do you approach going to a juggernaut of a convention like the PDAC?
Yeah, I think the benefit for me is typically that you get to, or hopefully are able to talk to the really, let's say, smart people that are involved in some of these companies. Because, I usually don't do many management calls, really. I don't know why, but I don't call up management that, every week and it's like, oh, what's happening and can you explain this or that and whatever. So when you have that kind of a one-on-one time and they don't have much option in terms of they're spending their time with you, so then you can dig into some topics, etc. And it's like I try to learn as much as I can, because there's stuff done by companies, let's say if we assume there are also good people involved, that might not make perfect sense to you, and then you get a chance to like, okay, why are you doing this? Why do you like that project? How do you think it looks for a major, let's say? What's the reason for having this project as a flagship project compared to the other, etc. And just basically to be able to hear their thoughts in a more, private manner, not talking like, juicy information, but just to, because obviously they can't say maybe everything, or they can't fit everything in a presentation or anything like that. So just to get more, details, because it's very comforting when you hear some, very smart guy talk about like, oh, we're doing this because that's what really needs to happen for this to be a success. Or it's like when you factor in the infrastructure here, that means that the value of whatever that could be found, for example, goes up this much, and the threshold for success is that much lower. And other than that, it's really a zoo. And there's a lot of times when you go around the booths and the people you maybe hope to be able to talk to, like the CEOs or something, they're often different private meetings or something like that. So it's, in terms of maximizing PDAC, I don't know if I'm going the right way about it, because I'm usually not that organized, actually. And at the same time, I have a pretty good sense of who I want to talk to, and hopefully I'll able to meet up with most of them, but I would say that it's not as maybe accessible as one might think. There's a shit ton of people there. It's just that that's a lot of people occupying other people as well. So I really think I need to work on maybe better actually preparing for the PDAC, setting up a bunch of stuff beforehand, because it is not as easy as one thinks. It sounds easy. It's like everybody's going to be there, so you'll be able to meet everyone. But it's like, no, that's actually not the case. Almost everyone I talked to was like fully packed in terms of scheduling. And when you do it like you're a late comer and just, shoot an email, it's like, hey, are you free to meet or something? It's like, yeah, I have a slot at like 4 p.m. but then you don't have a slot, and that's like the only thing that day, and then there's events at night and yada yada. So I think it's you really need to kind of put in the work, I was going to say. And if you're just a retail novice, don't have any connection to any company, then it's going to be, I think, most of the time pretty hard to find a junior or find CEOs to talk to. But the good thing, I guess, is that the underappreciated juniors, if they have a booth, maybe their CEOs are there because nobody cares about the story yet.
Yeah, Erik, I've been to PDAC a lot of times. Haven't been in the last 5 to 6 years, but it is a busy conference. And I think it's valuable for the companies because there are so many banks, especially because it is in Toronto, and different funds and different country officials that travel to PDAC. But as a retail investor, man, oh man, it's overwhelming. There's 2 different conference halls to go to. And quite frankly, there's just a lot of people getting pulled in a lot of different directions. You are right about that. But that comment that you just made, maybe you can get in front of some of those underappreciated stocks. Is that the vibe you got from the conference? Is just, again, how bifurcated this market is, where these good stocks continue to run higher, continue to push to 52-week highs, all-time highs for some of them. But then there's this other group of companies that just can't seem to get any traction out there. Was that obvious on the conference floor?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't spend too much time on the floor, not at least walking around, because you see someone every 10 meters, I was going to say. So you kind of get stopped a lot of the times. And I had some one-on-one meetings. So I wouldn't say I am the perfect barometer for the floor, but I would say that because some booths seem to be kind of always crowded. Some seem to be, basically people sitting there without anybody talking to them, which again, I guess is a sign that that's not a hot story. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that, you talk to a few people and you can kind of get a sense of who the hot stories are, in a sense like, oh, have you looked at this? And then you hear the same from another guy or whatever. And then later on, you get to see, actually, I saw some companies go up during PDAC, which I don't usually see. So it's like you can also tell that, the network effect. One guy that people respect, let's say, it talks well about a company, then you hear it from another guy, and he heard it from the first guy and stuff like that. So you can really see how it, some stories can become kind of viral, and they don't need to be hot before PDAC really, but as soon as someone is very excited for some reason, that word kind of gets around, especially if there's somewhat in the same circle. So then you can get kind of hit in the head with one or more names from many different people, and that of course starts this kind of, I'm not going to say FOMO, but it, I should probably look into it because I've heard the same name from, X amount of people by now. And then even if you're not maybe buying it, you can see that some share prices start to react. So it's like the word is getting around. I don't know, again, if it's necessarily from the booth floor, but it's interesting to see how information, let's say, travels around when you have a big group of people.
Yeah, Eric, I think you nailed it there with it being the network effect. It doesn't have to actually just be around the booth. It could be in dinner discussions and cocktail discussions and people walking the halls with other people. There's always these stories that tend to dominate people's minds at these conventions. And then a lot of times you check on them 3 to 6 months later and they've completely sold back off again. So they're kind of lit matches. They flash for a moment. But there are times where those stories that are being ignored and you can get quality time in with management. Were there any that you saw or any types of companies that you saw that were more herd behavior, people piling into them? Or were there any stories that you saw that were out of favor, like whether it's critical minerals or a certain metal or anything like that? Anything catch your mind as far as what was hot, what was not?
I guess some critical minerals were kind of hot. You maybe heard more than usual about rare earths and stuff like that. And I would say let's say fresh and hot discovery stories, they tended to be you heard those names from quite a few people, and you can see it in the share price. I guess that also goes back to what Corey said earlier, that some of the good stories good stories I should say, some of the hot stories they've kept running. So I think that's evidence of the network effect at play. It's fresh in people's mind. It's just happened, and kind of, it's in a sense early days because some are just starting the discovery phase. But I would say, contrary to that, like known discoveries, stories that simply doesn't have a lot of money, etc. So they're not hot right now because they haven't put out any real results, and that could be seasonality or a combination of lack of money plus seasonality, etc. Those are the stories you didn't really tend to hear much about. So it's typically the hottest stories I would say would be exploration stories with, let's say, recent news, recent hotness. that basically went around the floor. And of course, everybody feels good about those stories because the share price is up. Whereas those more like legacy discoveries, maybe, where the story is kind of intact actually, but there hasn't been much action, hasn't been much hype that you can see in the share price. I think those were more the forgotten ones, the ones that made a discovery 1-2 years ago, but haven't been that hot because they, were trying to raise money in a bear market. So they kind of got diluted and the share price looks awful, but nothing really bad has changed. They were simply not that hot. And I think those booths tended to be less visited. So I would say those are maybe the sleepers still, the ones that have a project, but simply are not hot yet again.
Erik, clearly we're in a bull market here, right? And now a bull market where the precious metals stocks especially are separating from the broad averages. We compare a lot of how the sector is doing compared to something like the S&P, and the S&P is going down, and these metal stocks, a large number of them are going up in this environment. And I know we haven't seen this environment that much. How important is it to you that companies have news coming up? Do you care about that there are news releases that you know of that are coming in the near term, or does that even matter to you?
Well, I mean, when sentiment gets hot, it's typically the hot exploration stories and the beta plays that will rise. And I mean, you see, it's like if we're down tomorrow, the beta plays are going to be hit the hardest. And today, I think like the pure exploration stories, whereas maybe they don't have a drill in the ground, etc., they're lagging because, I mean, yes, the price is going up and the whole sector is moving. So people are, flooding into stuff that has gold or silver, for example. And yeah, I mean, I just still, try to think about how are these companies going to look in 1-3 years, or maybe even more than that. I don't need to have a catalyst in the short term, really, because I'm not really looking forward to a time where they, get, let's say, overpriced, and I actually need to be really thinking about selling. And that's an environment I don't especially like. I like to buy when everybody thinks it's shit, because then you're not overpaying, and I don't need to be in the absolute hottest place, let's say, because yes, I mean, I can't tell which stock is going to go up the most next week or next month or anything like that. So I try to at all times stick to my strategy, which is that I think the price, the market cap is still cheap relative to all the news I can see coming out of 12 months, 18 months, and typically still I think that news that's more than 3 months out, it's not really priced in. But if we go in a hot environment, it's just going to ramp up the effect. That's like, okay, if there's real results expected in 1 week, it's going to be very hot, and even hotter in 6 days, from real results, and 5 days, and so on. So I mean, yes, the sector tends to change a lot, and maybe we'll go into a time where you can actually have a nice bump just going into assay results, which we've not seen in quite some time. We've even seen good results get punished. So it's a totally different beast when sentiment is high. Everybody's looking for an excuse to buy something if there's any hope of making money, whereas like we've been stuck where everybody's looking for excuses to sell. Basically, if they see any risk whatsoever, they get themselves to sell. So it's going to be a completely change in environment. And the alpha placed exploration stories are probably going to get more exciting as the beta plays revalue, and people are pointing to the fact that, hey, 1 million ounces is worth this much right now, and all of a sudden the early stage explorers look cheap. But I try not to influence that me too much and stick to, I mean, you'll do well if you simply buy cheap stocks. I mean, I'm not going to have the best performers. I don't expect to have the best performing portfolio. I don't expect to be all in the one metal that will perform the best either. I'm just trying to be somewhat right and not be exactly wrong.
That's a good outlook, Erik. At least if you're somewhat right and not too much wrong, you're making money. And it's impossible to know which is going to be the best names or which ones are going to have the luck on the drill bit. Not even the scientists or the people with all the surveys and data have any clue which one's going to animate the market. And a lot of time good results get shrugged off because they just can't message the market right. And other mediocre results get hyped just because they're good at marketing. So it's hard to separate it all, but I appreciate you giving us your boots on the ground take from PDAC, what you tried to do as far as how you approached your time there, but also how you're looking at the sector, which stories are hot, which stories are not. It still seems like a story is of the haves and the have-nots, and you still got to be a stock picker. And for those that are liking what Erik has to say, definitely check him out over at the Hedgeless Horseman. Put a link down below where you can follow along with his rants as he writes up companies, but also does videos where he dives into the sector and the stories and the stocks that are on his mind. Erik, thanks for spending a few moments with us here at the KE Report, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, guys. The same.